Welcome to the ESI Africa studio, broadcasting from the East African Power Convention in Nairobi. Today I am with Dr. Joseph Njoronge, who is the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Kenya. Welcome, Joseph. It's so nice to have you here again with us at the East African Power Convention. I'd like to find out, first of all, there has been a recent change in the ministry, and how did that come about, and how have you found it since the change?
Thank you, Barbaro.
Nicolette.
Thank you, Nicolette. Yes, indeed, there has been a change in our ministry. In 2013, I came in as the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, and since then we have had some change in the structure from 2015, and the main change is that a new department, what we normally call a state department within the Ministry of Energy and another state department of petroleum were created, and I continued to work as a PS in the State Department of Energy, and I have got a colleague, Adro, who is now in the State Department of Petroleum, mainly addressing the focus, the need to focus more on the energy docket and also on the petroleum docket. Considering that we have had discoveries of oil, and there are very many other activities and tasks that need to be performed with a very stringent focus, so that we can be able to exploit the resources both of energy and petroleum in the most effective way.
Right, and your ministry is going to be able to put that forward?
No doubt. We are equal to the task, and I think we continue with the journey of lighting the country, energizing the country, and ensuring that we have sufficient energy and the petroleum resources in the country at any one given time, and of course also working on the cost of these products to ensure that Kenya access these services at minimum cost.
But Kenya has been ranked amongst the top East African countries. So in terms of partnering with your neighbours, what would you advise around that?
Well, we already have several initiatives of partnerships with our neighbours. We have, for example, the East African Community, which is a fairly old partnership. We have got Northern Corridor Integration Project, which is again another partnership with our neighbors, and there are very many other partnerships like the African Union, which of course creates partnerships of all the African countries, and then there is also COMESA, which is also another partnership of trading blocks. So these partnerships are very important in terms of creating a larger market for the nations of the East African region. It's also a partnership that should create synergy within the various countries, and it's also a partnership that can enhance sharing of the resources that are available within those countries towards win-win arrangements where each country is a winner. And I will give example. For example, energy in terms of power systems. We have different types of natural resources in these countries. In Kenya, for example, we have had some hydro energy. We are now exploiting geothermal, and we have now reached about 600 megawatts of geothermal energy. We've also got abundant wind and solar. Our neighbor Uganda has more hydro resources than ourselves. And of course they have solar, they have wind and so on. Rwanda has some hydro, not as much as the other countries. And then South Sudan has got a lot of hydro potential, Ethiopia has a lot of hydro potential. And if we all share those resources, there is a likelihood that we would be able to reduce the cost of power so that each and every citizen of this country is able to access affordable energy services. One of the best ways of sharing these resources is by interconnection, making sure that the countries are interconnected with the transmission lines so that we can be able to transport power from one country to another. And we can still, the beauty of transmission lines is they can either move in one direction and they can also reverse the movement in the opposite direction. So those structures that bring about the sharing of the mineral resources is actually the theme and the topic of the convention that we have in this particular forum today.
So that brings me to the message that you had for the opening keynote this morning. That was a lot around partnerships and how you can build on that. What was your message that you contributed to that discussion?
I think our main theme in this conference is growing from strength to strength and creating projects with bankability. And indeed, we in Kenya have been able to create legal, institutional, and fiscal frameworks that have promoted participation of independent power producers in the sector. So far, we have got about 8 operational independent power producers. And there are a lot of lessons that we have learned along the way as we undertook the journey of negotiating the power purchase agreement with most of those investors. And indeed, in the African continent, I would say that we are ahead of the rest in terms of negotiations of the power purchase agreement, in terms of building the blocks that can be able to facilitate these power purchase agreements, all partnerships that create relationships between the generator and the off-taker. And it started with reforms. We had to do some reforms and battle our initially vertically integrated structure. We made it a horizontal structure, and we were then able to create a separate generation entity and transmission and distribution, thereby creating a generator and an off-taker. And once we created the generator and an off-taker, we were then able to bring in private investments who could engage with the off-taker and be able to institute a relationship of generating and supplying power with a power purchase agreement as a contract document that facilitates that trade relationship.
You've mentioned a lot about partnerships and the fact that the region is growing from strength to strength. In your view, over the past 12 months, what has been the one thing that has struck you as being an important milestone?
I think listening to the various speakers from the different countries, I did note that there has been quite a lot of emphasis on interconnectivity, and each country was able to demonstrate that there is either 1, 2, 3, or even 4 projects that are ongoing to facilitate interconnection amongst the countries of East Africa region. Starting with Ethiopia, we have got an ongoing construction of a transmission line between Ethiopia and Kenya. We have a transmission line between Kenya and Uganda. There is a transmission line between Uganda and Luanda. There is a transmission line between Kenya and Tanzania. To me, that is a very encouraging achievement by all the countries in the region. And considering the fact that these countries have different abundance of various resources of power, it will now be very easy to be able to share these resources by trading the power between one country and another. And by so doing, there is all the likelihood that we will be able to bring down the cost of energy. And we are endowed with a lot of renewable sources in the East African region. And all the resources that I mentioned, the geothermal, the hydro, the solar, the wind, all these resources are renewable. And therefore, it's encouraging to appreciate that each of these countries is focused on that interconnectivity. And at the same time, all those countries are very busy putting up their own generating power plants. Each country was able to demonstrate that there is an ongoing project of generation which at the end of the day will join in the mix of the current existing power plants and therefore be able to afford us reliable, adequate and competitively priced energy services, which is really what should be the objective of all of us, so that we can be able to create industries within the region, because there are no industries that can really be created without reliable, adequate and competitively priced power, because foreign direct investors are very sensitive to the cost of power, considering that it's one of the main input of any industry. And so we see a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how we can share the resources that we have in the region and how we can be able to serve our countrymen in a better way. I also realize that there is quite a focus of access. We want as many of our East African residents to access electricity. And each country is working very hard towards rural electrification, towards enhancing access of electricity to all the corners of the country. That indeed is very encouraging. And it makes me believe that in a short while, we will have access of electricity to our residents, just like you will find pertaining to developed world.
It sounds like you've had a very productive past year with some positive outcomes. But then bring it back to the East African Power Convention. And my last question to you is, what are you looking forward to hearing in the conference sessions later today and tomorrow?
I think what should be the takeaway in this conference is the fact that each country has stated very clearly of its desire to create an enabling legal, regulatory and fiscal regime. And these are the instruments that promote foreign direct investment. And I do recognize that this forum has a lot of investors, it has a lot of utilities, it's a lot of government senior staff, and these are the same people who can be able to promote those partnerships of independent power producers, those partnerships of public-private, so that together as stakeholders and as teams, we can be able to see more investments in the power sector. And one great idea of involving private investors in the power sector is the fact that in each and every country, exchequer resources are very limited. And these exchequer resources face a lot of competition by social and economic needs. And some of the social needs like healthcare, education, security, those needs are so critical that they occupy the top ladder of the priority list. And therefore, power, which has got a commercial perspective within it, is much easier to realize through private investors. And if we can be able to create frameworks for encouraging private investments, I will tell you, for example, in our country, we have not been generating power using exchequer resources. Most of our generation at the moment is through public-private partnerships. And we are working now towards even creating public-private partnerships in the transmission lines, which tells you that this forum is such an important forum for sharing information amongst the utilities, the investors, the government people, the lenders, who are equally very important in terms of facilitating the investments on the public-private partnership basis. So that to me is a very important takeaway and information as to what each country has in terms of opportunities of power development, whether it is in generation, whether it's in transmission, and whether it's in distribution.
There is a lot to look forward to in the East African region and in Kenya in terms of the opportunities that are coming up for FDIs and PPPs in the industry. Thank you, Dr. Njoronge.
Thank you too, and it was nice having this session. As I say, this is indeed a very important forum for sharing information and also empowering our African people towards creating sustainable energy services. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I'm Nicolette Pomba-Fonsale, editor of ESI Africa, coming to you from the East African Power Industry Convention.